Okay, students, in this lesson we'll learn about pattern. There's two main types of pattern. There's rectangular, circular. We'll talk about those in a second. Let's just also remember this is the main things that we're going to cover. All of the first ones we've already covered in some detail. So how to start a drawing, you should all know how to do that, how to use the drawing tools, how to dimension, and how to use the geometric constraints. So today we're going to add pattern to this list of items, and let's get started on that. Okay. So here we have the Fusion environment. Again, we're in week 2. In this case, this is summer 2020. So let's go ahead and start with that pattern. So first things first, I'm gonna save this first file. I'm gonna call it pattern 1. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a sketch. Okay. So remember, at this point, we've talked a lot about fully constraining a sketch and how to get that done. So from now on, we're always going to be expected to create fully constrained, fully defined sketches. Okay, so let's sort of keep that in mind as we progress. Now, there's two main types of patterns, and we can find them here in the create. If you go down, you will find circular pattern and rectangular pattern. Okay, so this is going to be a pretty short video, just because we want to do just patterns for this one. So let's start off with something like this. So I just built a rectangle. So type R in my keyboard, do the two corners. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make sure that this is a square, not a rectangle. So I'm going to use the equal constraint, and then I'm going to dimension it like so. 20 millimeters seems good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to position it. Okay. So let's do something like 80 millimeters in the X and 30 millimeters in the Y. And that's enough to fully constrain, fully define this specific sketch. Okay, so we have position X, position Y, the size, and then of course we have the angles. So we have verticals, horizontals, and all that good stuff. Okay, so I'm done with this first part. Again, now we're gonna start speeding it up a little bit. We're gonna move a little bit faster. You can always pause, rewind the video, and take a look at it again if you need to. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to create, and this time I'm gonna select the rectangular pattern. Okay. Now, anytime you start off something new, chances are you're probably gonna get a small menu like this on the right. So in this menu, it has a couple of things on the list. Okay, so the first thing that it's asking me to select is the objects that I want to do that pattern on. Okay, so essentially the template. So in this case, I'm going to select all 4 sides of my square. Okay, and then it's going to ask me for the direction. Do you want to go to the right or left, or do you want to go up, down? Okay, so there's 2 main directions that we can select here. Okay, so I'm going to do horizontal direction first. And then it's going to ask me select the type. Okay, so we can either give it the extent or we can give it the spacing. So let's select spacing for now. How many of them do we want? Let's keep it at 3. And then for our distance, how much space do we want between each of them? So keep in mind these things are 20 millimeters in length. Okay, so let's type 20 and let's see what happens. So in this case, what is going on is it's giving me a space of 20 millimeters from this side to the next one over. Okay, so in this case, because the length is 20, I'm essentially having 3 back-to-back squares. Okay, I don't really want that. Instead, what I want is 1 square and then 1 square as a gap of 20 by 20 millimeters, and then the other actual square. Okay, so instead of having 20 here, I'm going to do 40. Okay, now I want to show you something pretty cool about Fusion here, and that is you can either input numbers themselves, or you can actually do things like, if I know it's 20, in this case I know I want double of whatever 20 is, right? So I can do 20 times 2. Now I can do the math myself, and it's pretty easy because I know 20 times 2 is 40. But if you have some very complex numbers, you can always throw in some functions like that, and Fusion will still be able to answer those numbers and run the numbers and input the correct number in there and make this thing work. Okay, so in this case you can do something like 20 times 2, and then we can actually do two different directions. In this case, this is just going in one direction. We can make it go different directions, so maybe like symmetry. So in this case it's gonna do one on the right and then the other one on the left. We can change the number of quantity from 3 to maybe like 5, and then we can go from there. Okay, now that's just one of them. So this is going horizontally, but I can also make this thing go vertically. Okay, so in this case, this first section is for the first pattern that's horizontal. This second section is for the second pattern that's vertical. Okay, and then in this case I can set up different things, different numbers. I can probably do a 3 single direction. I can probably do another 20 times 2, but instead of going up, ask this thing to go down. So the number here for my distance would be a negative. Okay, so negative 20 times 2. And here we just did two patterns into one. Okay, so we did a horizontal and a vertical pattern. Okay, I'm gonna hit OK. Now, very important thing to note here, it's gonna grab the pattern feature, it's gonna grab the parent in the same way that it is. Okay, so if this first square wasn't fully constrained, fully defined, then the following patterns wouldn't be fully defined, fully constrained. Okay, so you just sort of have to be careful with that. As you can see there, if I delete one of the constraints, then everything sort of goes south, right? So it's not defined, it's not doing what it's supposed to do, and everything can move. Whereas if everything is defined, then even after you do the pattern, nothing's going to be able to move. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why you always have to try to always fully define, fully constrain whatever you're doing. Okay, so this is the first one. I'm going to finish that one off. I'm going to say okay, and then I'm going to go into the second one. Okay, so that was pattern number 1. I'm going to call this pattern 2. Okay, and with this one we're going to sort of repeat the same idea. I'm going to create a sketch, and then what I'm going to do first is I'm going to first make a circle. Okay, so we can sort of visualize what's going on. Okay, now this circle, it doesn't really have to have anything in it, but just because we're used to it, I'm going to fully define that circle. Okay, so maybe 150 millimeters, and then this circle I'm going to turn it into a construction. Okay, so there we go, we have a reference point, if you will. Okay, now what I'm going to do here is I'm now going to use this circular pattern. Okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use it with just a line, just so we can get started on it. Okay, so there's my line. Now I can define the length of the line, and I can probably also define the angle. So I'm going to start off with creating another horizontal line like so. I noticed that this one's construction as well, because I'm going to use that as a reference. And then that way when I add the dimension, I can add the dimension from that line to this line and give this an angle of 45. Okay, so again, all I'm doing is just adding one line, that's 100, and it's 45 from the X or the horizontal. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a pattern of this line all the way around my circle. Okay, so circular pattern. Notice that it's first asking me for the object, so in this case my line. Now this thing is now asking me for the center point, so where do I want this line to be patterned around? Okay, so my center point in this case is my origin, and then is going to ask me how many patterns do you want. Do you want 3, do you want 5, do you want 7, whatever it might be, and then it's just going to give you that number of patterns. Okay, and then also the type, it can do a full, or it can just do an angle, it can do symmetry. Most of the time we're going to do a full, so just sort of keep that in mind. okay? And then all this is doing is just doing the pattern of this one line 7 times around, including that one line that you already have, okay? And then if you scroll down here, you can see that quantity show up there as well. So you can always change that, okay? Again, notice that because I have this line fully defined, fully constrained, then everything else is fully defined, fully constrained, okay? If I were to delete that dimension, then the rest of the lines are not dimensioned either, okay? As you can see. If I were to delete the angle, then none of the lines have an angle. And you can do things like probably like a rotation, like so, okay? So just sort of be careful with that, okay? Now, that might be helpful, it might not. So you might do things like make sure that this line is vertical and then everything else is defined. Just sort of be careful with that, okay? And then we'll stop patterns here, and then we'll use this in following examples, okay? So we'll stop here.